The deep dive. Today we are tearing into one of the most remarkable and frankly quite ruthless national transformation stories in modern history. The forging of Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
We're looking at how one man really turned what was essentially a swamp into a global superpower. And it's a story that begins not with some grand victory, but with total public devastation.
Absolutely. It ends, though, in this staggering financial and, intellectual triumph that has frankly baffled economists and strategists for decades.
So our sources give us this clear, really dramatic narrative of state building. It just defied all conventional logic at the time.
That's right. And our mission here is to unpack, in detail how this tiny, resourceless island, which seemed, destined for failure, didn't just survive. It became a global model.
A model for prosperity and order.
Exactly. And we have to focus on the specific, surgical, often shocking, and sometimes, let's be honest, morally complex decisions that really drove this change. It's a story of turning sheer desperation into discipline.
And the ignition point for all of this, the moment of just pure white-hot desperation, has to be August 9, 1965. Lee Kuan Yew, the prime minister then, has just been completely blindsided. Singapore had briefly joined the Federation of Malaysia, and now it's been kicked out. He has to deliver this news live on national television. And the moment, it's just one of absolute emotional collapse.
It really is the defining scene, isn't it, of Singaporean history. Lee, this usually stoic, iron-willed man, is sitting there before the cameras. And he just breaks down completely. His voice cracks. He actually has to stop the broadcast for a moment. Tears are streaming down his face as he admits, we have been separated from Malaysia. He calls it a moment of anguish.
A public admission of this huge geopolitical defeat. Visceral.
Totally visceral.
Immediate. But to really get the shock of that moment, we need to understand the why. Why were they expelled?
Because it wasn't mutual, was it?
No, not at all. Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, which had a Malay Muslim majority, they forced Singapore out.
Why? What was the driver? It boils down to deep-seated fear and, ethnic politics. Singapore was this Chinese-majority island, incredibly efficient, very focused on commerce.
Right.
And Kuala Lumpur feared two main things. First, that Singapore's economically successful Chinese-dominated political structure might one day challenge the Malay political dominance in the Federation.
Okay, a political threat.
And second, they were genuinely afraid that Singapore's port, which was already thriving, would just completely eclipse their own development plans. Our sources are pretty clear. This was an expulsion born out of ethnic and geopolitical convenience.
Convenience. Wow. So they decided Singapore was too rich, too Chinese, too ambitious, and just cut them loose.
Pretty much. They just wanted it gone, cut the cord, and left Singapore totally adrift.
And for Lee Kuan Yew, this wasn't just political defeat, it was existential, an immediate crisis, because the reality check, the initial situation, was horrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
Singapore was, by almost any measure you look at, a failed state just waiting to collapse.
It really was. I mean, look at the vulnerabilities. This tiny speck of land, no natural defenses, zero self-sufficiency. It relied on Malaysia across the causeway for half its water.
Half its water.
Half its water, and a staggering 90% of its food.
90%. Incredible dependency.
Total dependency. And it had nothing else. No farmland to speak of, no oil, no minerals, barely any modern industry. Commentators at the time called it aptly a slum-ridden, overcrowded port.
And the internal conditions, the stats are just shocking. 75% of families lived in absolute poverty.
Yeah.
We're talking shacks, wooden squatter huts, makeshift housing. They lacked the most basic necessities.
Things we take for granted. No toilets, no running water inside homes, families queuing up to share filthy standpipes in the street, cooking over charcoal fires in these crowded lanes.
And that level of desperation, it was compounded by illiteracy, wasn't it?
Massively. More than half the population couldn't read or write properly. So you have this demographic pressure cooker combined with the political shock.
And it fuels this horrific internal instability.
Exactly. Before and around 65, the city was just racked by violent ethnic riots. Malays and Chinese clashing, often leaving bodies literally lying in the streets and gutters.
So this was the situation. Volatile, bankrupt, utterly dependent. This is the nation Lee Kuan Yew inherited.
That's the starting point.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Because the turnaround from that point is almost incomprehensible. How does a country that looks less like a nation and more like, as you said, a failed state waiting to collapse, a place with zero natural advantages, suddenly become one of the richest, safest, and cleanest cities on Earth?
Yeah.
It had to require something something beyond just standard political policy.
It really did. It required a complete refusal to surrender, and almost, you could say, pathological commitment to order. And this incredible strategic survival instinct that kicked in almost immediately after that very public emotional low point.
Which brings us straight to our first deep dive segment, the 6 weeks of despair and strategic survival. Because after that emotional TV broadcast, Lee Kuan Yew doesn't immediately call a cabinet meeting or rally the troops. He vanishes.
He does. He locks himself away, retreats into a place called Chanji Cottage. He was, by all accounts, physically and mentally shattered.
Really?
Yeah, the accounts say he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He actually needed heavy tranquilizers just to function. And for 6 weeks, Parliament just hung there in this state of terrifying limbo.
The whole region, the world, must have been watching, wondering if this tiny new state was just going to implode right there.
Absolutely. But here's the critical pivot. The essence, really, of Lee Kuan Yew's character. Amidst all that personal chaos, he maintained this total political rationality.
Even while needing sedation.
Even then, he was calculating. He wrote immediately to the British Prime Minister at the time, Harold Wilson, and assured him, "Do not worry about Singapore. My colleagues and I are sane. We are rational people even in our moments of despair. We will weigh all possible consequences."
Wow. That's not just reassurance, is it?
No.
It's a strategic declaration.
Exactly. It highlighted that the immense personal pressure wasn't going to derail the cold, hard, strategic calculation they needed for sheer survival.
Okay. So once he recovered, what was the first move?
First task, secure the geopolitical chessboard. That meant winning recognition before Singapore just vanished entirely, surrounded as it was by much larger, potentially hostile neighbors. Diplomacy first.
And they acted incredibly fast on that front.
Phenomenal speed. Within a month, he'd pushed Singapore into the United Nations and successfully won acceptance. That single act on the global stage, it solidified Singapore's existence, at least on paper.
But its immediate neighbors were still terrifying, right? This is the mid-60s. The region was consumed by violence.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Konfrontasi incident earlier.
Right, the Konfrontasi. That was Indonesian President Sukarno's violent campaign against the formation of Malaysia. And Singapore had suffered direct attacks because of it.
Like the McDonald House bombing.
Exactly. March 1965. Killed 3 civilians. Singapore captured the 2 Indonesian Marines responsible, tried them, and sentenced them to death.
Which must have created this immense dilemma for the brand new state.
Huge dilemma. You have to maintain the rule of law, right?
Yeah.
Punish those who killed your citizens. But executing them, which Singapore did, created an immediate existential diplomatic crisis with Indonesia, their giant neighbor. Because in Singapore, these men were terrorists who murdered civilians. But in Indonesia, they were seen as soldiers following orders, heroes in the eyes of Jakarta.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the execution just inflamed nationalist anger. Students stormed the Singapore embassy in Jakarta. Diplomatic ties frayed instantly. Lee had to choose moral justice or sheer political survival.
And he chose survival.
He did. He made this absolutely necessary but, while deeply humiliating diplomatic move.
What did he do?
He personally flew to Jakarta to de-escalate. And in this stunning display, you could call it political theater, he went to the graves of the 2 executed Marines.
No.
Yes. He bowed, and he scattered flowers on their graves. Now, our sources stress this wasn't an apology for the execution itself. It was a stabilization move. He needed to show respect for Indonesia's national sentiment while still holding firm on Singapore's sovereignty. The calculation was just pure pragmatism, stabilize relations, or risk being swallowed whole.
Cold-blooded calculation.
Yeah.
But strategically brilliant in the long run.
Absolutely. Because by 1967, just 2 years later, Singapore co-founds the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, alongside its former parent Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines.
So Singapore wasn't just this single isolated dot anymore.
Exactly. It was now cooperating, however cautiously, with its massive neighbors, part of the club.
But diplomacy alone isn't enough if you can't defend yourself, and the military shield was completely missing, wasn't it?
Totally absent. The British Empire was pulling its forces out globally, east of Suez's policy, and Singapore had no troops, no navy, no real military doctrine. The risk of future hostility, maybe from Malaysia or Indonesia, it remained acute.
So here's where it gets really interesting, as you said earlier. How do you build a military literally overnight?
Well, Lee creates the National Service in 1967, mandatory military service for every young man. But the key question was, who trains them?
Yeah, where do you get the expertise?
For training and doctrine, he secretly turns to Israel.
Israel. Why Israel?
He deeply admired Israel, saw it as a small nation that had consistently defeated its much larger, resource-rich Arab neighbors. They did it with a highly motivated, disciplined, and crucially, technologically savvy army.
So Israeli advisors came in secretly.
Very discreetly, often disguised, apparently, as Mexican or European businessmen to avoid upsetting Singapore's Muslim-majority neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia. They built the doctrine of the new Singapore Armed Forces basically from scratch.
Pure pragmatism again. He just needed effectiveness above all else.
Absolutely. And the result was rapid self-sufficiency in defense. By 1971, just 6 years after independence, Singapore had 16,000 men trained and ready.
16,000 in 6 years.
Yeah. Lee's philosophy was really forged in that fire of 65 and the confrontasi. If you cannot defend yourself, no one else will.
So he'd secured the borders, gained international recognition, established a basic self-defense force. The groundwork was laid.
Now. Only now, really, could he turn inward and finally focus on the internal collapse. The poverty, the slums, the ethnic strife that was still simmering.
Which leads us right into Section 2, the economic revolution and the foreign investment magnet. Lee knew, didn't he, that fixing the poverty and the ethnic violence required one singular thing.
Jobs. And crucially, stability. You needed both.
And he didn't trust local ideas for this, did he? He imported expertise again.
Immediately, he brought in this blunt, visionary Dutch economist named Albert Winsemius.
Winsemius, okay.
And Winsemius delivered the blueprint that essentially became the core of Singaporean economic identity. His central advice was simple, quite radical for the time, and totally opposed to the, prevailing anti-colonial nationalist sentiments of the era.
Which was?
Forget ideology, forget nationalism.
Meaning, don't worry about being socialist or capitalist, don't try to protect local industries.
Precisely. The strategy was purely pragmatic. Make Singapore utterly irresistible to foreign companies.
Okay, how do you do that?
By guaranteeing absolute political stability, ensuring zero corruption, keeping taxes low, guaranteeing labor peace, no strikes, and physically cleaning up the island.
Right, the no rubbish, no riots, no slums promise.
Exactly. The pitch was simple. If the investors come, the jobs will follow. Bring your factory here. It will be safe, clean, efficient, and profitable.
And did it work? Did the magnet effect happen?
Instantaneously and profoundly. Foreign capital just poured in because companies believed that promise of stability and efficiency. Factories rose up rapidly.
Attracting the big names.
Huge American and Japanese multinationals, Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, General Electric, they were building the first real stage of Singapore's industrial base.
And they leveraged existing assets too, didn't they? The old British stuff.
Immense strategic leveraging. The sources really highlight the importance of transforming those abandoned British colonial dockyards into thriving commercial shipyards and repair facilities, turning a relic of the past into a future income stream.
Smart. And then they created their own national champions.
Yes. Lee funneled resources directly into creating what would become symbols of Singapore Inc. He founded Singapore Airlines, SIA, immediately positioned as this global luxury brand.
Still known for that today.
Absolutely. And Neptune Orient Lines, NOL for shipping. These weren't just companies, they were deliberate symbols of Singaporean efficiency and global ambition.
And all this new industry, it required a specific kind of workforce, right?
Exactly, which necessitated a complete overhaul of the human capital system. The entire education system was, instantly reoriented to serve this new economic engine.
How so?
They pretty much stopped prioritizing things like humanities or colonial studies. The focus shifted aggressively to producing the specific skilled workforce they needed right then.
Engineers, technicians.
Engineers, technicians, skilled workers trained specifically to serve these new multinational corporations. Education became an input for the economic machine.
But economic success, getting those factory jobs, that only helps the people who get them. It doesn't instantly fix that massive housing crisis or the underlying political instability from the slums.
No, it doesn't. You still had 3/4 of the population living in those filthy shacks and huts. That needed massive direct state intervention.
Through the Housing Development Board.
Yeah.
The HDB.
Yes. Lee supercharged the HDB, transformed it into this bureaucratic leviathan capable of building massive, high-rise concrete apartment blocks at, frankly, lightning speed.
The scale sounds dizzying.
It was. They were moving hundreds of thousands of people every year out of the slums and into basic, clean apartments with running water and sanitation. This wasn't just fixing poverty. It was a crucial political move.
How so?
It gave every family a tangible stake in the nation. It helped turn potential rioters, people with nothing to lose, into property owners with something to protect.
Ah, okay. Clever. But how did they pay for all this? This mammoth infrastructure project, the housing, the ports, the roads.
That's where one of the most clever and powerful economic tools of the Singaporean state comes in. The Central Provident Fund, the CPF.
CPF, right. Mandatory savings.
Mandatory savings scheme, yes. But on a massive scale. To fund the HDB and ensure future stability, Lee forced workers to deposit a huge percentage, around 20% initially, of their wages into this fund. This went way beyond a standard pension scheme.
So how did it work? What's the analysis behind it?
Well, citizens saw it primarily as their retirement savings, which it partly was, but in practice, the CPF functioned as this giant, centrally controlled pool of national capital entirely managed by the government.
A massive state slush fund, almost.
You could see it that way, though controlled. This capital pool allowed Lee to bypass potentially crippling foreign borrowing or politically costly high taxes. He used the CPF funds to finance the housing boom, fund crucial state investments in infrastructure like ports and airports, and even bankroll those national champions like SIA.
But here's the crucial distinction, isn't it? The thing that makes Singapore's model unique.
Absolutely. Lee never diverted that money into welfare handouts or open subsidies like unemployment benefits. His rule was incredibly strict. Every citizen must use their own forced savings from the CPF to pay for their housing and their future. They had to stand on their own.
It's the purest form of non-welfare state capitalism, maybe. You get stability and infrastructure, but you pay for it yourself through forced savings.
Exactly. But to manage the sheer scale of development and capital generation, the government itself, the bureaucracy, had to be perfectly efficient and critically, totally incorruptible.
Right. No investor's going to pour billions into a country where they have to pay bribes just to get things done.
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to Section 3, the Iron Fist. Lee needed a clean machine.
And he used a two-pronged approach, didn't he? Carrot and stick.
A brilliant and, again, brutal two-pronged approach. Prong 1, the carrot, positive reinforcement. Double the salaries of ministers and top civil servants to levels competitive with the private sector.
Fine.
To ensure they were well rewarded for their commitment, to enhance their status, and crucially, to remove the temptation of relatively small bribes.
Yeah.
Make them too rich to bother with petty corruption.
Okay, that's the carrot. What was the stick?
Prong 2, the sledgehammer. Unleashing the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, the CPIF.
The CPI.
They gave it immense power and critically zero tolerance. Regardless of your loyalty, your rank, your connections, no exceptions.
And they use that power.
Without hesitation. The shocking anecdote here, the one that really set the tone for the entire nation, involves one of Lee's own most loyal cabinet ministers.
Cheng-wan.
Ta Cheng-wan, the Minister for National Development, the guy who helped lead the HDB housing effort.
The very same. He was caught taking about $1 million in bribes from two private companies.
$1 million. Wow.
The CPIB moved in immediately. Ted knew the political gravity, knew what was coming.
Before he could stand trial, Ted committed suicide, swallowed a large amount of pills, left a note declaring his innocence, but acknowledging he had to pay the ultimate penalty to protect his name, his reputation.
And Lee Kuan Yew's reaction to the death of his own loyal minister.
Perhaps the coldest, most politically defining moment of his career. He stated it publicly. He has done wrong. He has received bribes. I cannot save him. No one is above the law. Even a loyal minister like him is expendable, because if we accept one exception, then everyone will do it.
Chilling, but effective.
Incredibly effective. That decision cemented Singapore's anti-corruption credentials globally, instantly. It was a ruthless public sacrifice, really, signaling to every investor, every bureaucrat, that the Singaporean promise of stability and clean governance was absolutely non-negotiable, even if it meant destroying his own loyalists.
But didn't that kind of public ruthlessness breed fear rather than respect? Within the civil service, was there no pushback?
The sources suggest, well, yes, it certainly bred fear. But primarily, it bred certainty. Civil servants knew the rules were absolute. They knew the reward for playing straight was a high salary and public respect. They understood the necessity of that incredibly harsh signal for the country's survival and success.
Okay, so that stability, that clean reputation, was then aggressively marketed to the world, wasn't it? Through what people called the nanny state.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the state prioritized order and cleanliness, not just for basic hygiene or quality of life,
but as propaganda?
As deliberate, constant propaganda, a signal to the world that Singapore was governable, predictable, stable, and therefore investable.
So the massive Garden City campaign, planting trees everywhere, cleaning up filthy rivers.
Cleaning rivers that were basically open sewers before, creating parks everywhere. They were literally scrubbing the remnants of the slums away and painting the city green, specifically for the benefit of foreign investors looking down from their airplane windows as they landed.
And this extended down to micromanaging daily life, right? The things that made Singapore famous or infamous.
Oh, absolutely. Minute micromanagement, which the outside world often found kind of hilarious, but Singaporeans internalized as necessary discipline.
It's the famous chewing gum ban.
The chewing gum ban, yes. Drug traffickers face the death penalty hanging. Littering, spitting, even jaywalking could result in fines of thousands of dollars. The law was absolute, visible, and widely enforced. Order was paramount.
And this iron fist wasn't just for litterbugs, it controlled political dissent too.
Rigorously. Opponents were often bankrupted through strategic, costly lawsuits, or sometimes detained without trial under internal security acts. The press was, and largely remains, tightly controlled and censored.
Lee's philosophy was pretty clear on this, wasn't it?
Undeniably brutal, but clear. We decide what is right, never mind what the people think. The state knew best.
And this massive authoritarian control, it wasn't just for political stability, was it? It was used to actively engineer society itself to address the root causes of those riots back in '65.
Yes, this is where the state really steps in to set the boundaries for racial harmony. Lee declared all races, Chinese, Malay, Indian, equal. But the state immediately enforced measures to promote unity, or perhaps enforce unity.
Like with language.
Yes. 4 official languages were acknowledged: Chinese, Malay, Tamil, English. But English was made mandatory as the common language, the linguistic glue for business, administration, and, importantly, inter-ethnic communication.
And they tackled ethnic segregation head-on.
Actively counteracted the natural tendency for ethnic groups to cluster together in neighborhoods. They used housing quotas in the HDB blocks.
Housing quotas, how did that work?
They enforced rules to ensure that Chinese, Malays, and Indians had to live side by side in the same HDB apartment buildings. It was state-mandated proximity.
Forcing integration.
Forcing integration, yes. The idea was that the ethnic divisions that had previously led to violent riots would literally sleep next to each other, forcing, or at least encouraging, mutual understanding and daily dependence, breaking down those old enclaves.
And the state even got involved in the most private sphere of the bedroom.
It did. They launched the Stop at 2 campaign, actively discouraging large families, particularly among the poorer, less educated segments of the population. Though, interestingly, they later reversed that policy when they realized the aging population was becoming an economic liability.
Needed more young workers.
Exactly. But then there were the even more controversial, frankly, eugenics-adjacent suggestions, perhaps the peak of state interference in private life.
What kind of things?
Lee openly banned long-haired men from public service jobs for a time, seeing it as a sign of indiscipline. He pushed women aggressively into schools and jobs to boost the economy, and he openly suggested that, well, smart women should reproduce, while implying the poor or less educated should perhaps sterilize themselves.
Wow. That's highly controversial.
Deeply controversial. It was a state attempt, really, to control the genetic and social capital of the future nation.
Lee was essentially, as the source puts it, manufacturing Singaporeans.
Yes. Trying to control not just the present political and economic climate, but the very makeup, the genetic and social future of the population, all to ensure long-term economic survival and stability.
So, by the early 1970s, less than a decade after that devastating expulsion, Singapore has a flag, an army, a functioning economy, and this powerful propaganda machine blasting out one unified message. Singapore is rising. Disciplined, clean, efficient.
Which really enabled their rise to global authority and even defiance. That brings us to Section 4. The factories of the 60s were no longer enough. They need a world-class global infrastructure to cement their role as an indispensable global nexus.
So focus shifted.
Relentlessly towards expansion and, crucially, quality. They built Changi Airport, opened in 1981, instantly ranked among the very best in the world for efficiency, cleanliness, design.
Still is.
Still is. They grew the Port of Singapore into one of the busiest, most efficient global crossroads for shipping.
And Singapore Airlines.
SIA, launched in '72, became the ultimate symbol of their global ambition, marketed globally as the epitome of luxury, efficiency, high service standards. It wasn't just an airline, it was a flying billboard for the Singapore brand.
So they were positioning themselves not just as a regional player,
but as the indispensable gateway to the entire ASEAN region.
Yeah.
The hub through which electronics, shipping, finance, technology flowed.
And this growing economic clout, this success, it gave Lee the confidence for some genuinely radical foreign policy moves, didn't it? Even defiance against superpowers.
Oh, absolutely. The CIA incident in the 1970s is a prime example.
What happened there?
The American CIA apparently attempted to infiltrate Singapore's intelligence service. Lee's reaction was immediate, decisive, and designed to be humiliating to Washington.
But he exposed them.
Publicly exposed the agents, humiliated the American government, used the whole incident to prove that tiny Singapore could not be pushed around or spied upon, even by its powerful trading partners and security guarantors.
And then he did the unthinkable.
He fined the United States government $100 million for spying.
He fined the U.S. And did they pay?
America paid.
That is just stunning. What a level of assertiveness. It's a clear marker that Singapore was now playing in a different league. Financially stable enough, strategically important enough to demand that kind of respect.
It really was. And he didn't just challenge the West. His rhetorical attacks on regional partners and others were legendary, often quite brutal.
Like calling Australia
the white trash of Asia, for relying, in his view, too much on raw material exports rather than developing manufacturing prowess and intellectual capital.
Ouch. And India.
Dismissed India as a nation of unfulfilled greatness, crippled, he argued, by bureaucracy, caste, and corruption.
In Africa.
He warned African leaders point blank, repeatedly, that corruption would inevitably destroy their post-colonial hopes. He wasn't shy about dispensing harsh advice.
But he's also balancing powers very expertly, wasn't he?
Masterfully. Hosting American warships in Singapore's ports, providing logistical support, while simultaneously opening up crucial commercial and diplomatic pathways to the People's Republic of China, long before many others did. Playing both sides against the middle, you could say, for Singapore's benefit.
And this diplomatic balancing act, this model of authoritarian capitalism, it had real global consequences, right? The China example is amazing.
It's a stunning example of scale inversion. When Deng Xiaoping launched his historic reforms in 1978 to open up China's economy, he specifically sent multiple delegations to Singapore to study it as the model to copy.
So the world's most populous nation, looking for a blueprint for prosperity, went to learn from one of the world's smallest, most tightly controlled nations.
Exactly. How to attract investment, manage infrastructure, maintain stability, control the population. Deng saw something in Lee's model that he thought China could adapt.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Now, if we connect this defiance, this obsession with discipline and control, back to Lee himself, we realize his governance wasn't just pragmatic calculation, was it? It seems profoundly shaped by his personal history, by trauma.
Oh, definitely. The sources make that quite clear. You can see the scars that drove him.
Like his childhood.
Growing up, watching his father gamble away the family's money. That experience seems to have instilled in him this deep, lifelong distrust of chance, luck, and dependency on others.
But the really formative trauma was the Japanese occupation during World War II, wasn't it, in 1942?
Absolutely pivotal. He witnessed the swift, humiliating collapse of the seemingly invincible British Empire in Singapore. They surrendered in just 70 days.
70 days.
And that shock, seeing the British masters defeated so easily, seems to have forged his core political conviction, the one that really superseded everything else. In 70 days, he reflected later, the British Empire was finished. I decided then, no one will push Singapore around again. We must never depend on others. Self-reliance became everything.
And he personally experienced the brutality of the occupation too. He had to learn Japanese just to survive day to day.
Yes. And he also narrowly escaped the Sukching massacres.
The mass executions.
Where tens of thousands of Chinese men were rounded up by the Japanese military police, the Kempeitai, and summarily executed. Lee was caught in one of these roundups.
How did he survive?
Pure random luck. He was told by one guard to go back and fetch his clothes first. When he returned, a different guard waved him through a different line, sparing him from the trucks heading to the execution sites.
Just sheer chance.
Sheer chance. And these scars, witnessing the empire collapse, surviving execution by luck. They seem to have taught him the absolute necessity of cold, hard discipline and total self-reliance. Never depend on anyone else's protection. Never trust chance or luck. Everyone in every nation must stand on their own 2 feet.
And that philosophy became the absolute bedrock, the backbone of the Singaporean state he built.
Without a doubt.
Which brings us to the results. Because the results of this intensely focused, authoritarian, non-welfare state model are, well, objectively pretty undeniable, aren't they? Section 5. The results and the cost.
The GDP triumph alone is just staggering, especially when you compare it to established Western democracies. By the year 2000, remember, only 35 years after being kicked out as a slum-ridden port, Singapore's GDP per capita, around $24,000 then, already matched countries like Canada and France.
Matched them in 35 years.
Matched them. And the growth didn't stop there, did it?
No. By 2025, Singapore's GDP per capita reaches an almost unbelievable $90,000 per person.
$90,000.
Which is substantially higher than the United States, sitting around $85,000.
Yeah.
And just vastly, exponentially higher than its neighbors, its former parent Malaysia at $12,000, and giant Indonesia at only $5,000 per capita.
It's the ultimate proof, isn't it? That a country with literally zero natural resources can become a global intellectual and financial hub simply by transforming its people into its primary resource through discipline, education, stability.
And it's not just wealth, is it? It's knowledge, human capital.
Exactly. Singapore ranks consistently right at the very top of those demanding OECD PISA tests for education. Beating global educational powerhouses like Finland, Japan, South Korea. In math, science, and reading. That education system, designed back then to produce technicians, somehow succeeded in producing world-class intellects, too.
But, and it's a big but, this raises the crucial question we absolutely cannot ignore.
The price.
The price of success.
It was undeniably high, wasn't it? Sacrificed individual freedom, strict press control, state interference in the most minute details of private life. From what you chew, to who you live next to how many kids you should have.
And Lee never wavered on that, never apologized for the cost. His final famous defense of his methods was incredibly blunt, almost defiant.
What did he say?
I am often accused of interfering in people's private lives. Yes, he just owned it. If I had not, he continued, we would not be here today. So he saw those authoritarian measures as the necessary prerequisite, the essential condition for achieving the security and the prosperity they now enjoy.
Absolutely. He demanded discipline, control, order. And in return, he delivered wealth, safety, stability on an unprecedented scale. It was a trade-off.
And the final scene, the closing image of this whole incredible saga, it seems to perfectly encapsulate that tension, the complexity of his legacy. Lee Kuan Yew dies in March 2015. He's 91.
And the national outpouring of grief was just unprecedented. Almost 2 million Singaporeans.
2 million. Out of a nation of about 5.5 million.
Exactly. Lined up, often for hours, in torrential rain, just to file past his casket to pay their respects, to say goodbye.
Goodbye to the man described, often contradictorily, as the dictator who gave them hope.
That phrase captures it perfectly, doesn't it? It was this staggering public endorsement of his results, of the stability and prosperity he delivered, even acknowledging the cost in terms of freedom.
So where does that leave us? What does this all mean? We've reviewed this central tension of Singapore, this model of incredible, undeniable economic success, but built on relentless order, discipline, and strategically sacrificed individual freedom.
And if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, Lee Kuan Yew fundamentally demonstrated something profound, I think. He showed that human capital things like discipline, education, zero tolerance for corruption, strategic global positioning can utterly negate a complete lack of natural resources.
He took a resource-starved island
and turned its focused, highly governed, disciplined population into the single most valuable asset on Earth.
It's a compelling blueprint, one he successfully enforced for decades. We've seen his vision was quite literal. Make Singapore cleaner than London, safer than New York. And by most metrics, he achieved it.
He did.
But this brings us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given Lee's core philosophy that the state decides what is right, that success requires authoritarian discipline, is Singapore's model truly replicable? Could it work in a large, messy, diverse democratic country, say like India or the United States?
Or was it something unique? Did Singapore's specific geography, its tiny size, its ethnic mix, and crucially, that initial existential desperation back in 1965, did those factors make its particular authoritarian path perhaps the only viable option for the kind of success it achieved? Was it a product of its unique, desperate circumstances?
Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive.